All right, we'll get started this morning. Sorry for the delay. All right, Grant, you want to come up here? Do your thing. Got the verse. It's on the front of your bulletin there. Brother Jim, you get a bulletin? Yeah? Okay.
Might need that. All right. So the verse for this week is Romans 14:19. And turn over to there quick. But the verse says, "Let us therefore follow after the things which make for peace and things wherewith one may edify one another." So as I was reading it, I was just thinking, I'm like, it's saying, "Let us therefore follow after the things which make for peace." And I mean, if you're in the world, you go to a job, you go to the grocery store, you see there's not a lot of peace anywhere. There's not a lot of really hope for anything. Peace it's rare to come by, and there's even people, like we watched the movie last night, and there was people who the guy's goal was just to get as much money. Like that was his thing. He wanted to get as much money, but there was still no peace. There was nothing there for him. It was when he found at the end of it, whenever he made all the money, there was nothing. He was still missing something. And as it says, "Let us therefore follow after the things which make for peace." And when you follow for those things that make for peace, you find peace. You find peace at the end of that road, or even during that road. And that's one thing that money can't buy. Money can't buy peace. Money can't buy the things of God. And that's what they're saying. It's saying follow those things which make for peace. Make that basically what we've been talking about these past couple weeks are about the preacher, about the gospel. And that's the only thing that will bring you true peace. And the second part of the verse says, "And things wherewith one may edify one another." So it's saying if you strive for those things which are for peace, which are for what God wants you to strive for, it's saying, "And the things wherewith one may edify one another." It's saying that you'll want to build someone up, that you want to edify them. And that word edify is to build up, that to bring someone and show them, say, hey, there's more to life than what you're living right now. The money, there's more to just the money. There's more to just the fancy things of this world. But that peace, that the things of God will give you the things that you're looking for. And when you do that, you'll be able to share that with someone else. And that is what that edify means. So that's all I got for the verse.
Thank you, sir. All right. A lot of people are looking for peace, right? But not a lot of people are making choices that lead to peace. Good thought there, Grant, on peace and the things wherewith one may edify another, right? So our service should be for others, right? And edifying means to build up, to encourage, right? Another word for feeding. To seek the things which help and build up others. And then Brother Paul's out of town, so we'll go through and we'll do the upcoming events here in March coming up real soon. We have the Ladies' Conference. Okay, it's the 7th of March. And then the 28th of March, you have the school or the yard sale school fundraiser, right? The church-wide yard sale, and that's for money for the school there. That's the 28th. So bring in your stuff, and we'll put it out for people to come and purchase. So, and then we have the men's meeting coming up on June 12th. We got a lot of plans for that. So men, obviously, be prepared to be there for that. And then youth conference is the 21st, and I could be wrong. Is this wrong? The 21st through the 24th? That's right. That's the right one. Okay. I know that there was a change. So the 21st through the 24th is youth conference this year. So keep that in your prayers. Also, obviously, if there's any way that we can help out with that or plug in, feel free to do that. Am I missing something? No? Okay. All right, Merce was giving me a face, so I'm going to go with that. And then prayer requests. What? Oh. So prayer requests. Prayer requests. Of course, we have Brother Mike and Miss Wanda's recovery with the eye and the knee surgery. I think they're doing pretty good as far as I know, unless somebody has further information. Miss Tyson's recovery, I think she's in the back there walking around with the cane, so we're doing good there. Keep her in your prayers. And then Bobby's treatments, pray for him. And then Ron's hip and back pain, from my understanding, it's getting a little bit better.
And that's remaining from the
Yeah.
surgeries he's had.
Yeah.
And the job situation.
Right, in his job situation.
I don't know that, I probably said it already, that he'll be able to go back to the same job that he had because it's so manual.
Right.
And I don't know that he'll ever be to that place, at least
Yeah.
not right away, I'm pretty sure, but, yeah. But we did have some answered prayers
Mhm.
recently, but it wasn't
Right.
all that was.
So be praying for Ron to find a job. I assume to find a job that fits what he needs to do physically,
Yeah,
right?
I think he'll have to go back there or quit or something, but of course he's got that insurance.
Right.
You can't,
You don't want to.
he can't be left without insurance.
Yeah. Yeah. So pray for him. The Lord has a way of working it out, right? So keep him in your prayers with that. And then Miss Tyson's health. I know she has an issue breathing when it's cold out. Is there any update with that, or just keep her in your same? Okay, keep her in your prayers. All right. Any other prayer requests that we, Pastor? Definitely. Anybody else prayer requests? Brother Charles? All right, unspoken. Amanda, Brother Joe, we'll get to you. Brother Donnie, Miss Helen. All right, Brother Joe.
Brother Harding, we need to keep him in prayer. He's having some issues.
Yeah. Surgery?
Yeah, they're concerned about my kidney function. It's not up to par.
Anything else, Brother Joe? Yep.
Yeah, JT will be speaking at that church, probably calling the pastor. He's speaking there again next Sunday, and then the following Sunday we'll go to him.
All right.
Oh, and the bus conference out there at North Platte, apparently Satan's fighting it pretty strong. One of the keynote speakers had to back out on him.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't know why.
Hmm.
We'll just guess that he's got sick. Maybe he's lightheaded
And dizzy? All right. So keep bus conference in prayer. In North Platte.
that's tomorrow too.
Tomorrow and Tuesday. All right. Any other prayer requests? Brother Jim, you were saying something about your kidneys?
Well, now,
You were saying something about your kidneys?
I didn't hear what you said.
You were saying.
So it's not up to par what they wanted to approve, I guess.
All right. So pray for Brother Jim. He's having issues with his kidneys. They're trying to figure out what's going on with that. Any other prayer requests? Any other prayer requests? Brother Joe.
We need to be praying for the upcoming election. Tuesday is the filing deadline for anybody to run for office.
Got to put your name in.
Well, we'll see. I do know that Prince George's County has more Republicans registered than it's had in a long time. That's
Mhm.
not saying much. And Charles County is not doing very good getting Republican candidates. There's also a lot of other stuff
It's no Don's help
as
this
far
year.
as the redistricting going
And then Brother Jim mentioned praying for Miss Donna's health.
That's some of Donna's health that she
Miss Donna's health, just keep her in prayer. Some Brother John. Sorry.
I've had 7 accidents in the last 2 years, and the last 2 were here in February, and the last one, the 13th, was just messing with my head. I had a concussion, and it's just not right in my head right now.
Mhm.
So I'm having other people drive for me. But even taking the phone calls from the kids, I get the people mixed up. We end up going to different places today, and it's like, no, it's up at this place. And I'm just like, I told Maddie, you're gonna have to take phone calls. I can't take phone calls. So just praying that, and it's like every single one of them lied on those 7 accidents, and if it weren't for the cameras I have in front and back of all my vehicles, I would have gotten anything for any of it. So 2 ER visits, and I'm probably on another one.
All right, so pray for Brother John with all of that. Any other prayer requests? All right, Luis, can you pray for us this morning? Thank you, sir. Then we got on the back, you got the wrong word of the week. Today is National Cook a Sweet Potato Day. Okay, so that's not something that I'm interested in by any stretch of the imagination. I don't like sweet potatoes. Regular potatoes is the only way to go. Yep. And I stand by that. Nope, not crazy. You're all crazy. Yeah, and we don't believe in sweet anything, Brother Joe. We believe in regular, savory potatoes. Yep. Doors over there. There's actually 2. If you want to go out one and then come back in, then go out again. And then we got the random fact of the week. This one's pretty interesting. I don't know if you had a chance to look at it, but it says in 1978, a man named Gary Hoy tried to prove that the windows of a skyscraper in Toronto were unbreakable by throwing himself against them. The glass didn't shatter, but the entire window popped out of its frame, and he fell 24 stories. So technically, he was right about the glass, just not the frame. So interesting fact there. Good one there, Marissa. Good job. Thank you for putting that together for us. And then, of course, on the inside, you have the game of the week. You got February. We got some, looks like what are these things called? Crossword puzzle? Yeah. So you got a crossword puzzle. It looks like it's really tiny. You need to get your magnifying glass out if you got it. So then the first one to turn that in to me or Allie. Well, let's do Allie. First one to turn it into Allie gets the prize there. So Marissa got the prize last week or 2 weeks ago, and she was justly rewarded. So she actually made out like a bandit. $5 on Cash App. Yes, I did. Yes, I did. Look it up. That's more than most people get. Usually it's like $3.50 or $4.50. Yeah, $5 you came away with a steal. You find it? Bro, does Grant send you that much money you're still scrolling? She said yes.
No, she's got the credit cards.
It's in there. I hope I didn't. Yeah, she got it. Yeah, thank you. It was 2 weeks ago, so, and of course I wasn't here last week, so. We were down in Tennessee. We went to the Temple Baptist Church in Knoxville, Tennessee, so that was pretty interesting. Yeah, it was interesting. they're building. When you drive up to it, it actually like feels like you're going to a temple. It's huge. The building's huge, very, very high ceilings. Anyway, so I was interested in the architecture there. It was pretty interesting. So it was. Stand by it. Marissa, don't laugh. All right, so we're in Genesis chapter 47. Genesis chapter 47. We're continuing on with the story of Joseph. We're going to see the kind of a sad statement from Jacob here at the end of his life, towards the end of his life, and then we'll see the shrewdness, right, of Joseph, and how when you have the right man in charge, things tend to work out for you. And it does matter who that man is, right? He needs to be in touch with the Lord. He needs to be wise. He needs to be humble. Because Joseph was those things, he had a special blessing from God. And anytime Joseph was in a place, he did it the absolute best, right? They walked away, and they were 10 times better than they were before. Of course, we see that with Jacob, and then we see that down the road when he's in Potiphar's house and then in the prison, and we'll see that under Pharaoh also. Not only did the people of Egypt not starve, but Pharaoh thrived, and we'll see that here shortly. In chapter 47, it says, "Then Joseph came and told Pharaoh and said, My father and my brethren and their flocks and their herds and all that they have are come out of the land of Canaan, and behold, they are in the land of Goshen." Right, so Joseph's talking to Pharaoh, giving him the heads up. And he took some of his brethren, even 5 men, and presented them unto Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto his brethren, "What is your occupation?" Right now, Joseph prepared them for this, right? He said that tell them that their occupation is a shepherd, right? A shepherd, because they're cattlemen, right? They despise shepherds, which is true. If you study some of the older Midwest, cattlemen did not like sheep herders, okay? They looked down on them, okay? It's the same thing back in Joseph's day. So it says, Pharaoh said unto his brethren, "What is your occupation?" And they said unto Pharaoh, "Thy servants are shepherds, both we and also our father." Now, were they shepherds? Yes. That wasn't their purpose, right? That was what they did for a living. They kept the sheep, but their purpose was to follow God's will, right? Ultimately, Abraham left who he was and followed the Lord, right? So they wouldn't classify themselves necessarily as shepherds, although they kept sheep, right? They were children of Abraham, the promised, right? They were the promised children. So they had a purpose that was outside of their occupation, right? A lot of people, and if you go through the world, right, you'll find people, you talk to them about what they do and who they are, and most of the time what they'll talk about, their substance of their life is in their job, right? This is what I do. I'm a carpenter, right, or an electrician or a politician or whatever that is, right? That's who they are. We have something different, right? By trade, right, I'm a maintenance guy, okay? I work in the maintenance field, but I am not that's not the sum of who I am, right? And that's hard for people who don't understand to wrap their mind around, right? Because their world revolves around what it is that they put their energy into. And of course, that's work, right? So that's not who I am. I'm not an employee first of Pizzuto. I don't bleed black and whatever green or anything like that. That's the colors of Pizzuto, if you didn't know. That's what I do. That's what I do. Who I am is I'm a Christian, right? I'm a follower of Christ. That's who I am. A lot of people, they say, "What are you?" Right? And they say, "Well, I'm an electrician," or "I'm a blah blah blah," right? They find their meaning in their work, right? And it makes sense. They do that most of the day, right? But we do what we do to put food on our table, but we're Christians, right? We're ultimately Christians. I have an overarching responsibility that trumps everything else, right, that comes along, and that's because I'm a follower of Christ, right? So that being said, Joseph tells them, when they ask your occupation, tell them you're a shepherd. Why? Because they keep sheep. But that's not who they were. They were God's chosen people, right? So that being said, verse 4, it says, and they said, moreover, unto Pharaoh, for to sojourn in the land where we are we come, for thy servants have no pasture for their flocks, and the famine is sore in the land of Canaan. Now therefore we pray thee, let thy servants dwell in the land of Goshen. And Pharaoh spake unto Joseph, saying, thy father and thy brethren are come unto thee, and the land of Egypt is before thee. In the best of the land make thy father and thy brethren dwell. Right, so Goshen would have been the best of the land, right? The best of the land of Egypt. He says, send your brethren over there. And if thou knowest any man of activity among them, then make them rulers over my cattle. What's he saying? He's saying if you know somebody that wants to work, right, or if they want to make a little money on the side, have them take care of my cattle. Right now, that would have been a prestigious position, right? You're taking care of the king's means of his substance, right? In verse 7, it says, and Joseph brought in Jacob, his father, and set him before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. All right? And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. In verse 8, it says, and Pharaoh said unto Jacob, how old art thou? And by the way, the blessings, right, of the patriarch was no small thing, right? We saw that with Jacob or Isaac and Jacob and Esau, right? A blessing from a patriarch was a big deal. So Jacob coming in and blessing Pharaoh had meaning. It wasn't just words. So Jacob comes in, and then Pharaoh said unto Jacob, how old art thou? Right? So how old art thou? He must have been pretty old if he had to ask, right? He was like, man. In verse 9 it says, and Jacob said unto Pharaoh, these days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have the days of the years of my life been, and have not attained unto the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from before Pharaoh. Right? So what's Jacob saying there? He's saying it's a sad recollection, right? He's looking back on his life, and he's saying that I've lived 130 years, which is substantial, right? But he says the number of my days and my years are less than the number of days in my father's years in their sojourning. What's he saying? He's saying wasted time, right? Because he's saying the days in a year. How many days do we have in a year? On average, we have 365, right? What's Jacob saying? He's saying that he has the same number of days in the year, but the numbers, it felt like it was quick. It was wasted, right? It was wasted. Jacob recognizes towards the end of his life that Pharaoh, who's head of the world at this time, right? Everybody's coming to Pharaoh for food. I'd say Pharaoh was pretty prestigious. And he says, how old are you? Right? He says, well, my sojourning has been 130 years, and I've only really used up a short time of that, right? The short period of that time has been valuable, has been beneficial. The days of my years have not attained unto the days of the years of my fathers, right? Hopefully we don't get to the end of our lives and look back and say all that time I only lived but blank amount, right? Or but a short time. That we would give what we would give to have 130 years, right? To have 130 years. But what Jacob's saying is that it was a short time, right? It was a short time, not because time flies, but because he wasted so much of it. And of course we know, because we followed Jacob through his life, right? We know the times that he wasted and the times that he threw away because of mistakes that he made. Right? And when that happens, Jacob recognizes that now when he's talking to Pharaoh, he recognizes that that time has been wasted. And now, although I've lived a long time in the years, my days have been short. Right? The actual valuable time has been short. We should make the most out of the days of our year. okay? That means that it should have value. In order for it to have value, we have to, and this is what Ecclesiastes is all about, right? Vanity, vanity, all is vanity, right? What gives life value? Ultimately, the end of days, and we've talked about this before, but what gives life value is our service for the Lord, right? To keep His commandments, right, and to follow them. That's what gives our life substance and value, and how we live our lives throughout our days, right? When we subject ourselves to the Lord, and we live a life dedicated to the Lord, when we look back on it, we see substance, right? We see substance. We don't say that our days were short in our years. We had less days in our year than we normally would, but we look back and we see a full life, a life dedicated for a significant and substantial purpose, okay? A lot of people, they get to the end of their days and they feel like time is too short. Time is too short. That it is, right? It's always too short, but what we do in the time that we have is what gives it substance, right? Gives it substance. And the younger we are, and it's just the nature of things, the younger we are, the less we think or recognize this passing of time and the value that we have in each day, right? And as we go and we get to a certain point, right, maybe we get married, we start having kids, or even a little bit before that, we start working a job, or we're going through whatever chapter we're going through, and we rush through that chapter to get to the next one, when we need to recognize that those chapters are filled with days that we're going to look back on, right? That we're going to look back on. And will your life, when you get towards the end of it, right, and you're talking to somebody, is your story going to be the same as Jacob's? That I had a long life, right, many years, but the days of my years were not substantial, not valuable. Grant talked about it a little bit with the money thing, right? We go out and we work. If our whole life is dedicated to making money, right, at the end of the day, you can't take that with you, right? There's no value in it. There is value, right? It gives us food on our table, a house over our heads, the ability to be generous and giving to others. There are benefits to money, right? But money can't be our lives because there's no substance to it. If you chase success, right? Jacob spent a long time perfecting his trade under Laban, right, as a cattleman. So Jacob spent a lot of time being very good at what he was doing, okay? But Jacob looked back on his time and he said that my days were not valuable, right? They didn't turn out what I was expecting it to turn out, right? When I got to the end, it was less than enjoyable, right? Less than valuable. Hopefully, we can recognize before we get to Jacob's point, right? We can recognize that service for the Lord ultimately is what gives our lives value. We have to push forward in service, right? So Jacob gives us a little peek. We see a little peek into Jacob's view of his life, and that's that he wasted a lot of it. Hopefully we don't get to Jacob's day and feel the same. In verse 10 it says, "And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from before Pharaoh." So Jacob, of course, gives the blessing again to Pharaoh. In verse 11 it says, "And Joseph placed his father and his brethren and gave them possession of the land of Egypt in the best of the land and in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph nourished his father and his brethren and all his father's house with bread according to their families." Right? So Joseph, of course, has control over all the food. He gives food to his family, provides them with the food they need to survive. In verse 13 it says, "And there was no bread in all the land, for the famine was very sore, so that the land of Egypt and all the land of Canaan fainted by reason of famine." Right? So now this is an overview of what Joseph did during his time. It says in verse 14, "Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the corn which they bought, and Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house." Right? So we see that Joseph prepared, right, for the famine. The famine came, and he gets to the point during the famine where people don't have any money left to buy food. right? He's collected all the money. I'd say Joseph did a pretty good job with the economics in Egypt so that he ended up having the monopoly on food, right? That's pretty substantial monopoly. And he collected up all the money that Egypt had, all the money that Canaan had. They turned it in for food to Joseph, right? So Joseph has that money. Of course, he brings it to Pharaoh, and he lays it at Pharaoh's feet, brings it to Pharaoh's house. Verse 15, it says, and when the money failed in the land of Egypt, so everybody had spent their last dime for food, and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came unto Joseph and said, give us bread, for why should we die in thy presence? For the money faileth. Right? He says, well, we don't have any money, so you might as well give us food. Right now, Joseph could have ended it here. Right? He could have recognized the value of people necessarily, and said, okay, I'll give you the food that you need. Right? Because you'll die. But Joseph wasn't a shrewd man. Right? He was wise. It says, and Joseph said, give your cattle, and I will give your food, give you for your cattle, if money fail. So he says, okay, you ran out of money, give me your cattle, right? Give me your cattle. So Joseph recognized the possessions, right, that people have. He says, okay, you don't have any money left, so I'll take something different than money. I'll take your cattle, right? So he takes all the cattle. It says and Joseph gave them bread in exchange for horses and for the flocks and for the cattle of the herds and for the asses, and he fed them with bread for their cattle for that year. So he turns in all the cattle, or he receives all the cattle, gives out the food, and that's the end of that year, right? So now Pharaoh has all the cattle. It says, and when that year was ended, they came unto him the second year, and said unto him, we will not hide it for my lord, how that our money is spent. My lord hath our herds of cattle. There is not aught left in the sight of my lord, but our bodies and our lands. Wherefore shall we die before thine eyes, both we and our lands? Buy us and our land for bread, and we and our land will be servants unto Pharaoh. And give us seed that we may live and not die, and the land be not desolate. All right, so now they're offering themselves, right? They say they're going into an indentured servitude, right? They're now giving years off of their lives to Pharaoh because Joseph had all the food, right? He says that we'll sell you our land and we'll sell you ourselves. That's a bad place to be. Right? That's a bad place to be. Now, remember, this is what's going on in the world, right? Because that's how the world works. God's people are shielded from this, right? God's people, all the world, right? Canaan and Egypt, all of them are selling themselves for food while God's people are over in the land of Goshen feeding their flocks, right, straight from Pharaoh's table. Isn't that pretty awesome how God works there? And God still does that today. He shields his people from the world, right? From the troubles of the world, and not only that, he sets it up that way, right? He sets it up from back in the day when Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery. Now Joseph was moving his way into position to save his brothers from the famine and his father. So they get to the end. They said, "Sell us." We'll give our lands, we'll give ourselves. And Joseph bought all the lands of Egypt for Pharaoh. For the Egyptians sold every man his field because the famine prevailed over them. So the land became Pharaoh's. And as for the people, he removed them to cities from one end of the borders of Egypt even to the other end thereof. Only the land of the priests bought he not, for the priests had a portion assigned them of Pharaoh, and did eat their portion which Pharaoh gave them. Wherefore they sold not their lands. Verse 23, it says, and Joseph said unto the people, behold, I have bought you this day and your land for Pharaoh. Lo, Here is seed for you, and ye shall sow the land. And it shall come to pass in the increase that ye shall give a fifth part unto Pharaoh, and 4 parts shall be your own, for seed of the field, and for your food, and for them of your households, and for the food of your little ones. And they said, Thou hast saved our lives. Let us find grace in the sight of my Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's servants. And Joseph made it a law over the land of Egypt unto this day, that Pharaoh should have 5th part, except the land of the priests only, which became not Pharaoh's. Right, so we see that towards the end here, right, the end of the years of famine, now Pharaoh has all the money, he has all the cattle, and he has all the land and its people. Right, so now we're kind of leading into I just had a mind blank. Total, yeah, well, not a monopoly, but there's a feudal term for it, feudalism, right? Where you own the land, right? You own everything on the land and the people, and they give to you, right? What's owed to you. So now Pharaoh owns the land, he owns the people, right? So these people are so desperate they sell themselves in their land, right? They get the food that they need, and then Joseph says, I'll tell you what, right? I'll give you your land, right? We'll put you back on your land, and we'll have you give a 5th of that to Pharaoh because it's his land anyway, and you can keep a 4th, right? And they were so grateful. They said, you saved our lives, Joseph. So at the end of the day, Joseph turns this situation, right? Imagine, now Pharaoh, the reality is Pharaoh could have taken their land anyway, right? He was the king. But not now he has ownership, right, of all the lands of Egypt, okay? And they're thanking him for it. Okay, that's what happens when you have the right guy in charge, right? A person who's shrewd in business, right, wise, and ultimately has a connection with the Lord. Right now, Joseph would have never been in the position that he was in, right? He put the effort in, the work in, right, in Potiphar's house, and he made Potiphar's house successful. He served in prison, right? He was faithful in continual service, and ultimately he ended up in Pharaoh's house, but he would have never gotten there, right, if God never gave him the interpretation of the dream, right? What does he say? He says, well, I heard that you can interpret dreams. He says, whoa, let me stop you there. I can't interpret anything. The interpretation comes from God, right? And ultimately we recognize that, and God gave Joseph the interpretation of the dream. And Joseph gives him the solution to the problem, right? The solution was that he needed a man that was wise and shrewd in business, right? Of course, he says that there's no other man better than you, and Joseph takes over. And then at the end of the day, right, at the end of the 7 years, okay, that would have been crippling, right? Many people would have died, right? Many people would have died. At the end of the day, Pharaoh was more rich than he ever was, okay, times 10, right? And now he owned everything in the land of Egypt. He set Egypt up for success, right? And then we see, of course, we remember Egypt and think of Egypt as, you know, a superpower of the day. Well, Joseph set them up to be that, right? Now they owned all the land. They were receiving taxes, a substantial amount of taxes, right? 1/5, okay? And they kept 1/4. So they kept it was a substantial tax, right, on the land. And now Pharaoh is in control of everything, okay? Because the right man was in the right place and had the right attitude and the right spirit and was subjected to the Lord, okay? Joseph's life was not to be Pharaoh's lackey, right? His purpose was not to be Pharaoh's second hand, right? What was his purpose? His purpose was to serve the Lord, right, and to do what was right. Because he did what was right, because he was subjected to the Lord, because he was faithful to the Lord blessed that, okay? And ultimately, God put him there not to make Pharaoh rich, but to save the people of Egypt, or save the people, the children of Israel, right, the children of Jacob. and all the people that live there, right? The fulfillment of the promise, right? He made a promise to Abraham that they would leave the land, right? They would live in Egypt for a few hundred years, and then they'd come back, right? And of course, we see that a little bit after. But we see the shrewdness of Joseph, and we see God's blessing in his hand on him. When you have the right person in the right place, God blesses that. God blesses that, leaps and bounds, better than you ever could have imagined. But you need somebody who is faithful and submitted to the Lord. You need somebody that's faithful and submitted to the Lord, and it makes a big difference. Makes a big difference. And also, we should be the person, right, who is so subjected to the Lord. Remember that in Potiphar's house, he received more and more responsibility because he was continually faithful, right? And same thing with in Egypt, right? When we're faithful in the little things, right, as a servant in the house of Potiphar, and we're continually faithful even when we end up in prison, right, then God can use us and make us faithful and abound in a greater capacity than we could have ever imagined. But we need to stay faithful and consistent service to the Lord, right? We're honest, right? We try to stay true to the Lord and to what is right. Even though everything stacks up against us, we continue to do what's right. That's what makes the difference. The Lord makes the difference, and he blesses those that are good and true to him, all right, and follow his commandments. So that's our thoughts on Joseph this week. We'll kind of round things off, and then we'll see kind of a bigger picture of the family and the blessings a little bit later. So let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you for this day. Lord, thank you for all that you do for us. Lord, I pray that you help us this morning. I pray that you help us to be like Joseph, Lord, to be faithful and consistent. Lord, serving you, even when it seems like it's minor or we're not in a good place. Lord, I pray that you help us to stay faithful to you so that you can bless us when the time comes. Lord, and we thank you for all that you do. You're good to us.